it probably goes back to stuff that people had told me back when I was at an undergrad. That is that if you want to kind of progress in that field, conservation and wildlife and biology, then you really kind of need to have a PhD. I think you need to be a doctor because in some instances, I really think there's a glass ceiling unless you have one of those qualifications. So I began thinking about how I would get those jobs, and to get those jobs, I probably needed a high-level degree.
Yep.
So how was I going to go about getting one of those degrees? And the first step for me was to get a master's degree, sort of a higher up degree than I had, and then I would use that to get to go and find a PhD. So I decided in the end to do a degree in entomology, which is the study of insects, based on because the fact that I was good at that subject at university, I enjoyed it, and insects in general are, if you're going to study the natural world, insects are just fascinating, and they really are so important. So there's a really famous ecologist called E.O. Wilson. He's kind of like this huge figure and probably one of the most eminent ecologists and biologists we've had in the last 50, 100 years, And he said that insects are little things that rule the world. And he's right, because they're involved in so many important processes and they're so numerous. So if you're going to think about what to study, if you're interested in the natural world, then insects are a very important part of that process. And other things like birds and mammals, if they disappeared, would the world look that different? Probably not.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It'd be sad if they did disappear, but the ecosystems themselves, the diversity wouldn't change that much. So, okay, I'm going to ask you a question.
Sure.
How many species of mammal do you think there are in the world? Species of mammal.
Oh man, I'm gonna be put on. Fuck, I don't know, man. Like 10,000.
Not too bad. Okay, so there's 4,000 species.
Oh fuck! Okay. I thought it was gonna be like a million.
And that number hasn't changed very much.
Okay.
Because it's rare to discover new species of mammal. How many species of bird do you think there are?
Probably like 500.
10,000.
Oh
species
shit!
Of birds. So there's a lot of species of birds around.
Okay.
Now, how many species of insects do you think there are?
Oh man, probably a million or something.
The answer is we don't actually know this because there's so many that no one could possibly count or know how many species there are. We reckon that there's somewhere between 8 and 30 million species of insect.
Whoa.
But as of yet, we probably only have about 1 million of those which have a name, which is an amazing feat, just to have given a million different species their own 2-part name, their own Latin name. So, in the context of that, let's meet in the middle and say there's something for like 15 million insect species, and then you think about 4,000 mammals, and it's a rounding error. It's completely lost in this sea of diversity which is insects. So they're the real kind of stars of this planet. We are very interesting, but insects are they're at the peak of evolutionary success and expansion and diversity, and they're really kind of amazing in that sense.
Yeah, I've heard the statistics, and you probably know better, but I've heard that if you wipe out all human beings, as you were saying, Earth won't look much different. It'll probably be way better off,
We would be,
Yeah, but if you wipe out like all the ants, like we're screwed.
Yeah, the ants are so important for particularly kind of ecosystem functions. So they particularly in the tropics, they take all this biological matter and they turn it back into nutrients, which then goes back into trees and then back into living things. So they're very important in nutrient cycling, and they're also quite important predators in lots of places. So they decrease the number of lots of other species and allow plants and other animals to flourish. So they kind of help to maintain the balance. So these kind of keystone species.
Right. Is that similar to how, like, when they introduced the wolves in Yellowstone,
Exactly, yeah.
They started killing off like reindeer, and that enabled the trees or the shrubs to grow, and that kind of changed the course of the river, and then it changed the whole landscape.
So the ecological term there is a keystone species. So something which has a dramatic effect on underpinning its environment and ecosystem. If you remove that, like wolves, then you'll get these kind of cascading effects where everything is affected in different ways.
Yeah.
So insects and ants particularly are super important in that respect.
Yeah.
But another, people talk about bees and other pollinators as well. What would we do without bees? Well, we'd survive, but a lot of the really good things in life that we enjoy, the crops, so things like tomatoes, mangoes, avocados, without pollinators,
Mm.
You know, we might have them, but we'd probably have to hand pollinate them ourselves, which would take a lot more time and be a lot more expensive.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're very important in our lives and to the ecosystem in general.
For sure, yeah. And before we move on to the next question, but I heard some crazy stat that if you add the biomass of all the ants on Earth, it roughly equals the biomass of all the humans on Earth.
I'd be surprised, yeah, if the biomass of ants wasn't greater. You're looking at countless millions of colonies, each containing, up to 2 million, 10 million individuals in some extreme cases. So yeah, the biomass is insane.
That's crazy.
And they're such important animals in tropical ecosystems, but also if you go somewhere like, if you take a walk outside and go into the Cumberland Plain woodlands just across the way here in Richmond, then you'll see hundreds of different loads of different ant species doing exciting things and managing that ecosystem in the best way. Most conservation effort goes towards preserving big charismatic species like pandas or elephants or things like that, and there are definitely good sides to that. These very large animals use big areas of land, and by conserving those big areas of land for the large animals, you kind of conserve small areas or the areas of land for small things as well. They're kind of what we in the conservation industry they're called umbrella kind of species, I guess. So I think, I'm not sure if people always enjoyed thinking and looking at these big animals, but I wonder whether it's put the emphasis too much on these what we call charismatic megafauna, these massive things that are really interesting. And as a biologist, when you kind of don't distinguish between the right of an ant species over the right of an elephant species, they're all kind of very important and have been evolving for billions of years. But I always think that publicity for animals and their particular plights is always good in any light. But yeah, I think it maybe has shifted things towards thinking about just the big species, orcas and lions and elephants and things like that, when we should really be having a more kind of holistic approach to how we think about wildlife.
Also, I mean, I'm not sure if you're aware of that dentist who went and shot that rhino in Africa.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't remember his name, but yeah.
And there were other cases where Cecil the lion, I think, was another one. But they have these parks in Africa where they maintain the populations of rhinos or lions, and they have to kind of control their populations. And I believe that rhino was an older rhino that wasn't able to reproduce and was attacking younger males. And so because of that charismatic megafauna, perhaps because of Disney movies, when it comes to lions and rhinos, people get super attached. And I suppose where I was coming from is like, even when it's good for the population for that rhino to die because you raise money and that money is used for conservation, and killing that rhino means that other males have a chance to breed. Even though that's the case, we attach this emotion because of Disney movies or whatever the case, and that in itself can get in the way of trying to preserve these animals.
Yeah, I think so. It's a really interesting question. Like, is that morally right? Kind of sacrificing one animal for the good of all of them. And I think it can be quite a dangerous area when you think you can do that morally, to sacrifice one for the good of many. I'm not really sure where I stand on that issue yet, in terms of sort of big game hunting, and it's probably going to be quite specific to each individual case, and each individual animal, and how threatened it is and how it's being managed, and various things like that. But yeah, it's very interesting, and I think it's the way that a lot of conservation is moving towards that kind of that model of conservation. But as an animal lover, the idea of killing for sport or killing for enjoyment, I find kind of a little bit abhorrent, and I can't really understand it. Or people that sort of get a lot of enjoyment out of that. I can understand killing to eat, for sustaining yourself, but killing for sport isn't something that I can really condone in my line of work.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat as you.